Greetings and peace. I would like to start this with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be with you and yours. Today's presentation, I would like to do a book review for my book, The Islamic Sufi Influence on the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. This is my 8th book and publication, and I hope you enjoy and benefit from the teachings that I have to offer, and I represent myself only. This presentation is created strictly for educational, research, entertainment, and fair use purposes. It is a non-profit informational presentation summarizing the ideas discussed in my book, The Islamic Sufi Influence on the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, by yours truly, Salman Sheikh. The presentation does not endorse any organization, institution, belief system, or fraternal body, and it does not encourage anyone to join or participate in any organization mentioned. The material is presented solely for the purpose of studying intellectual history, philosophy, and cross-cultural exchange of ideas. The goal is to explore philosophical teachings that can inspire ethical self-improvement, intellectual curiosity, and respect for global civilizations. The viewers are encouraged to focus on universal lessons such as wisdom, humility, moral refinement, and the pursuit of knowledge. The ideas presented here should be interpreted as part of academic dialogue about historical influence and cultural exchange, rather than advocacy for any group, ideology, or institution. Now, the work of this book examines historical, philosophical, and symbolic parallels between Islamic intellectual traditions, particularly Sufism, and the symbolic structure found within certain Masonic traditions. Now, the argument here is that the intellectual environment of the Mediterranean world allowed philosophical ideas to circulate between Islamic and European societies for centuries. The book suggests that the Scottish Rite and other symbolic traditions should be understood within a broader network of civilizational exchange, rather than viewing Freemasonry purely as a European invention, which is not. And the book proposes that its symbolism reflects influences from multiple cultures that interacted across trade routes, scholarly networks, and translation movements throughout the medieval and early modern Mediterranean world. Traditional histories of Freemasonry often describe it as a uniquely European development emerging from medieval stonemason guilds and Enlightenment philosophy. While this interpretation contains some historical truth, the book argues that such explanations are incomplete because they overlook the broader intercultural environment in which European intellectual life developed. The Mediterranean world between the 8th and the 17th centuries functioned as a network of continuous intellectual exchange. Scholars, merchants, and travelers moved ideas between Islamic, Jewish, and Christian societies. Within this environment, philosophical concepts, symbolic traditions, and systems of knowledge were constantly adapted and reinterpreted across civilizations. The introduction of the book emphasizes that intellectual history is rarely confined to a single civilization. Europe's Renaissance and Enlightenment were deeply influenced by knowledge preserved and expanded within Islamic civilization, especially the presence in Al-Andalus in Spain. Mathematical, philosophical, and scientific works translated from Arabic into Latin shaped the intellectual foundation of later European scholarship. By understanding these exchanges, institutions like Freemasonry can be interpreted within a wider global context. The symbolic language used in the philosophical fraternities reflects centuries of shared intellectual traditions that developed through dialogue between cultures rather than isolated invention. One of the major themes discussed in the book is the problem of Eurocentric historical interpretation. Many historians historically framed intellectual developments as primarily European achievements, while minimizing the contributions of other civilizations. This approach shaped the way Freemasonry's history has often been interpreted. The book argues that acknowledging the intellectual contributions of Islamic scholars, philosophers, and mystics provides a more accurate understanding of the environment in which European symbolic traditions developed. Instead of diminishing European achievements, right? To be fair, recognizing these connections highlights the collaborative nature of global intellectual history. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, Islamic civilization became one of the world's most important centers of scientific and philosophical activity. Scholars in cities such as Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba translated Greek philosophical works while also introducing and producing original contributions in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and metaphysics. These intellectual achievements were later transmitted into Europe through translation centers in places like Toledo and Sicily. As European scholars encountered Arabic scientific and philosophical texts, they incorporated these ideas into developing academic institutions and intellectual traditions that eventually influenced the European Renaissance and thought and era. Islamic architecture and art developed highly sophisticated geometric systems that symbolized the unity and harmony of divine creation. Complex patterns used in mosques and manuscripts reflected mathematical precision and metaphysical symbolism, illustrating how multiplicity emerges from a single underlying order. These geometric principles influenced architectural knowledge across the Mediterranean. When European builders constructed Gothic cathedrals, similar geometric and proportional systems appeared, suggesting that technical knowledge circulated between cultures through trade, craftsmanship, and scholarly interaction. Medieval Islamic societies developed ethical fraternities known as Futuwwa brotherhoods. These organizations combined elements of guild structures, moral philosophy, and spiritual discipline. Members pledged loyalty to ethical principles such as generosity, humility, courage, and service to the community. Many Futuwwa organizations were associated with Sufi orders and emphasized moral development alongside professional craftsmanship. Initiation ceremonies, ethical codes, and hierarchical instruction within these brotherhoods share similarities with later European guild systems and symbolic fraternities, and the idea of chivalry and the tradition of chivalry was introduced into Europe through Islam. Sufi traditions describe spiritual development as a journey through successive stages of knowledge and moral purification. Disciples advance through levels of understanding under the guidance of a spiritual teacher, gradually transforming their character and perception of reality. This model of progressive initiation resembles the symbolic structure found in certain philosophical fraternities. Both systems emphasize that knowledge is not merely theoretical, but transformative, requiring ethical discipline and personal refinement. So, perfecting your character and smoothing out your rough ashlar into a smooth ashlar, and just working away at those imperfections and refining your character. In the Sufi path, they call that tazkiya ul-nafs. The Mediterranean world functioned as a cultural crossroads, connecting Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Trade routes linked cities such as Cairo, Venice, Cordoba, and Constantinople, Istanbul, allowing goods, manuscripts, and philosophical ideas to circulate widely between civilizations. Within this environment, scholars of different religions frequently collaborated in translation projects and intellectual dialogue. Such interactions created an environment where symbolic traditions could be adapted and reinterpreted across cultures. So the Kabbalah, for example, it developed in Moorish Spain, under the Islamic presence, where Muslim and Jewish scholars and teachers were able to exchange ideas and build these systems. So gematria, the Abjad, Sufi system, the numerology, Kabbalah, from the Sufi path. So it's all interconnected. Although the Crusades were periods of conflict, they also created extended contact between European and Islamic societies. Western knights stationed in the Levant encountered advanced systems of science, architecture, medicine, and philosophy developed within Islamic civilization. These encounters contributed to the gradual transfer of knowledge between cultures. Over time, exposure to Islamic intellectual traditions influenced aspects of European chivalric codes, philosophical thought, and architectural practices. The Knights Templar established long-term presences in the Eastern Mediterranean, where they interacted with Muslim communities and rulers. Cyprus being an example, and Cyprus is where the Naqshbandi Sufi order is based. Historical records suggest that diplomatic and economic relationships sometimes existed between Crusader orders and Islamic authorities. Later symbolic traditions occasionally incorporated Templar imagery within philosophical narratives. The book suggests that historical encounters between Templars and Islamic societies may have contributed to the symbolic environment from which later traditions developed. Some historical accounts describe a symbolic credential known as the Mediterranean Pass, allegedly used by travelers to demonstrate membership within ethical brotherhood networks spanning multiple religious communities. While the historical details remain debated, the concept reflects the cooperative culture of Mediterranean trade networks. Such systems of recognition illustrate how professional guilds and philosophical fraternities created mechanisms of trust among individuals from different societies. These practices may have influenced later traditions of symbolic recognition used in fraternal organizations. And the Mediterranean Pass, I have done a video on this before in detail, and it's a system of initiation by the Moorish and Muslim Algerian Masons of North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East, which allowed many of these European travelers and Knights Templars and Knights of Malta to pass their way unmolested, right? And the system was signs, grips, tokens, passwords, which were later incorporated into these different traditions that we see today. And it's a pre-1717 tradition. During the Renaissance, many philosophical and scientific ideas originally preserved and expanded within Islamic civilization entered European universities through translated manuscripts. Thinkers encountered advanced discussion of metaphysics, ethics, and cosmology that enriched European intellectual life. This intellectual environment encouraged the search for universal philosophical principles capable of transcending religious divisions. Philosophical societies and symbolic fraternities emerged as spaces where moral teachings could be explored through allegory rather than dogmatic theology. And look at it this way, the Moorish presence in Spain brought Europe from darkness into light, right? The Masonic aspect, and how they were all being persecuted by the church at that time. So it was Islam that basically saved Europe. Speculative Freemasonry developed gradually from earlier guild traditions of operative stonemasons. These guilds used systems of apprenticeship, moral instruction, and symbolic tools associated with architecture and construction. When the fraternity evolved into a philosophical society, these practical tools were transformed into symbolic instruments representing moral principles. The building of a temple became an allegory for constructing ethical character and wisdom within the individual. The ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the AASR, developed an elaborate sequence of degrees designed to communicate philosophical teachings through drama, allegory, and symbolism. Each degree introduces new moral lessons and symbolic narratives intended to encourage reflection and ethical development. The book argues that many symbolic themes within these degrees resonate with philosophical concepts found in earlier Mediterranean traditions, including Islamic metaphysics and Sufi interpretations of spiritual progression. And if you look at the Knight of St. Andrew's degree, that is a Sufi degree. The double-headed eagle became one of the most recognizable symbols associated with higher degrees of the Scottish Rite. While often linked to Byzantine heraldry, the symbol also appeared in earlier Near Eastern and Islamic contexts, particularly during the Seljuk period. In philosophical symbolism, the two heads facing opposite directions represent expanded awareness and the reconciliation of dual perspectives. This motif reflects broader metaphysical themes about unity emerging from duality, and how also in the Islamic prayer we give salam to the east and to the west, and how Allah, right, God is described as the Lord of the east and the west in the Quran as well. So that double-headed eagle gives respect to everything. And this is what I'm trying to teach, the European Freemasons and the white American Freemasons, that when it comes to the Masonic tradition, you gotta give credit to all sides. And this is my goal of my videos, lectures, and presentations and books. Architectural symbolism plays a central role in many philosophical traditions. The idea of constructing a spiritual temple reflects the belief that ethical development requires careful discipline and self-reflection, much like the work of a master builder shaping a structure. In both Islamic metaphysical literature and symbolic philosophical traditions, architecture often serves as a metaphor for the human soul. The refinement of character is portrayed as the gradual construction of an inner sanctuary dedicated to wisdom and knowledge. The metaphor of light as knowledge appears throughout many philosophical traditions. Islamic illuminationist philosophy of Suhrawardi describes spiritual knowledge as a form of divine light, guiding the seeker toward deeper understanding of reality. Similarly, many symbolic traditions portray initiation as a transition from darkness to light. This metaphor emphasizes that education and wisdom gradually illuminate the mind and encourage moral responsibility. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, instructed all Muslims that knowledge is obligatory on all of us, seeking knowledge from cradle to grave. A major emphasis throughout the book is the ethical dimension shared by many initiatic traditions. Concepts such as humility, service, honesty, and compassion appear consistently in both Islamic ethical teachings and philosophical fraternities that promote moral self-improvement. Rather than focusing on institutional membership, the book emphasizes the importance of applying these ethical teachings in everyday life. The ultimate goal is the development of character and the pursuit of wisdom. So it's about teaching you this information, and then you as the seeker and the doer apply these practically in your life. So there is a learning phase, and then there's the application phase of knowledge. How do you apply this information into your everyday life and becoming a better human being? That's the goal here. In the modern world, societies often emphasize cultural differences and historical conflicts between civilizations. The historical connections explored in the book demonstrate that intellectual traditions have always developed through cooperation, translation, and dialogue between cultures. So pluralism is what solves majority of society's problems. And the world that we're dealing with today, right? If we all accept and love each other, that solves majority of the issues. Understanding these shared intellectual roots can encourage mutual respect and cross-cultural understanding. Recognizing how civilizations contributed to one another's development highlights the importance of knowledge exchange in solving contemporary global challenges. The study of this book concludes that Freemasonry and similar symbolic traditions should be understood within the broader context of Mediterranean intellectual exchange. Ideas about ethics, architecture, symbolism, and spiritual development circulated across civilizations for centuries before becoming institutionalized in later societies. By examining these connections, historians can develop a more inclusive understanding of intellectual history. The pursuit of knowledge has always been a collaborative effort shaped by many cultures working together across time. And of course, for references, that this presentation is based on my book, The Islamic Sufi Influence on the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which is now available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover formats. And I'll post a link in the description below. And I thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. If any questions or comments, please email me at salmansheikh911@gmail.com. And of course, all my work is for the purpose of fair use, the copyright laws which are protected for the purpose of education, entertainment, free speech, and nonprofit purposes. Thank you so much. All rights reserved.